Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with reference recordings. And here's one you've all been waiting for. Bach's Goldberg Variations. And there's no mystery to it at all, right? The reference recording is the Glenn Gould 1955 Bach Goldberg Variations on Sony, or Columbia, which is what it originally was, in glorious mono sound. There was never going to be a question about this one, was there? That was the recording that put the Goldberg Variations on the map. It's an extraordinary performance of the Goldberg Variations. I mean, some people hate it, but whether you like it or hate it doesn't damage its extraordinariness one bit. It is what it is. It's a monument in the discographic history of the work. But it's interesting, as in all of these reference recording talks, to talk about how it got that way and why it's persisted that way. It's really a very, very interesting topic. Fascinating topic, actually, because before Glenn Gould, people didn't really know that much Bach. I mean, they didn't. I mean, they played it. They played the well-tempered clavier. Piano students were trapped in doing the 2- and 3-part inventions, which we used to call the 2-part contraptions. You know, they're very, very difficult if you're a starting pianist because they require absolute equality of the two hands, which nobody has when you're like 3. Maybe Bach's kids did. Who knows? Anyway, Bach was almost considered a didactic composer, and not someone you listen to really for pleasure. But what's more, the Goldberg Variations particularly were the province of what I call the looney lady set. The looney ladies, well, there were 2 looney ladies who specialized in Bach performance before Glenn Gould came along. One of them was this babe here, Rosalind Turek. I guess that's a sculpture of her or something like that. She played and recorded the Goldberg Variations as often as, twice a week. No, seriously. She did it constantly. She played Bach on the piano. She claimed her way was Bach's way. She claimed that Bach came to her when she was having some sort of out-of-body psychic break or schizophrenic break or something, and told her exactly how he wanted his music played or something like that. She was very highly respected. She was very eccentric. She was extraordinarily interesting as a person. She really was. She had a wonderful repertoire. She did contemporary music. She did everything, but she was famous for doing Bach. And because she was such a nutcase, Bach was something of a nutcase's music. I mean, anybody who was like William F. Buckley's favorite pianist used to play like the Goldberg Variations in his living room, amidst champagne and caviar, when the lockjawed Episcopalians were discussing the politics of the day, So, yeah, she was really a pip, let's put it that way. And she was never going to be somebody who was going to earn for Bach the kind of popular acclaim and consensus necessary to do to make a reference recording. And like I said, she recorded it several times on strange little labels. Finally, at the end of her life, she redid it for Deutsche Grammophon. It took like 3 hours because her tempos got very slow and deliberate, and it was just weird. It really was. And weird is not what you want in a reference recording, generally speaking. Now, the other loony lady, absolutely splendidly loony lady, was Wanda Landowska. She was running around playing Bach on the harpsichord. Now harpsichord as a profession, I mean, it was totally unheard of. It was a dead instrument. Nobody liked it. Thomas Beecham described it as sounding like 2 skeletons copulating on a tin roof. I mean, you didn't play the harpsichord back then, although some people did. In the 50s, we were at the very birth of the period instrument movement and the return to these things on period instruments. But to play Bach on the harpsichord was a curiosity. And Landowska was nothing if not a curiosity. She played on a gigantic Pleyel harpsichord, actually, that had, all kinds of bells and whistles and things to do special sounds and whatnot. It was hardly a period instrument. She was a splendid artist, and she's beloved as, the pioneer, the pioneer in her field of playing Bach on the harpsichord. But pioneers don't always get all the credit, and they don't get all the attention or all the acclaim. She was a pioneer, but she was viewed slightly askance. Let's put it that way. And I also think, frankly, frankly, truthfully, that both of these looney ladies, and I say that with the greatest affection, I really do, were looked at as kind of out there because they were female. You know, it was okay for women to be crazy. They were supposed to be a little crazy, especially if they were in the performing arts. You know, they really were, because all the critics were men and all the people who ran it were men, and they were looked on with a kind of bemused affection and no small degree of condescension. You may say that I've been looking on them with no small degree of condescension, but I'm not really. I respect what they did. I really do. And it was path breaking. It really was. To specialize in the music of Bach, whether on the piano or to do it on the harpsichord, was a really unusual and novel thing. So where does that lead us? Well, it brings us to Glenn Gould in 1955. First of all, I don't think we can ignore the fact that he was male, which is a big deal. I mean, it's a bigger deal than you think. It really is. I mean, just unconsciously in the way people perceive the legitimacy of what they're doing. That meant he could be a professional. He wasn't like so many lady artists were considered to be, sort of like salon wallflowers and things like that, because they couldn't have real careers. And you know what I mean? There was that thing was still very present. It still is in some respects. It really is. It certainly is with respect to composers, female composers. So he was male. He was young and somewhat kind of photogenic in a mousy kind of way. And more to the point, he made a recording of the Goldberg variations that came along at the right time. It was on a long playing record. It was the entire work. He played it very quickly. He played it very quickly with no repeats. So it all fit on one LP, 40 some odd minutes worth. It made the work digestible. It made the work digestible as a piano piece, because however quirky and bizarre Glenn Gould may have been personally, and God knows he was eccentric in a way that these ladies never were. I mean, he was a real eccentric, seriously eccentric. But at that point, he wasn't known for being that eccentric. He really wasn't. I mean, that came later. You know, the myth, the craziness, and the retiring from, live performance and whatnot. But back then, he treated it as a virtuoso piano piece, and he had the virtuosity. I mean, yes, his tone was dry and brittle, and it was all interested in counterpoint, but that's what the Goldberg variations is. It was the perfect work for his particular technique, and his technique was stellar. I mean, literally, nobody could do what he did when he did it. And so that created just an explosion of interest in this piece by a composer who everybody revered, but nobody really wanted to listen to, except for maybe the Passions and some of the choral works and whatnot. You know what I mean? But these keyboard pieces, they were considered, well, Bach called them Klavierübung, keyboard exercises. And people took that the wrong way. They took exercise in a purely didactic sense, whereas, of course, for Bach, it meant the embodiment of all that was musically significant that you had to learn and acquire as an artist, and that he built into these things. But that's only one half of the equation. It's the other half of the equation is what Columbia, then Sony, did, because this recording has to be one of the one or two most flogged recordings in the entire classical discography. I mean, the only thing that really matches it probably is like the Callas Tosca, something that has never been out of print, that has perpetually been promoted and re-promoted. I mean, that's the point. It's been issued and reissued and reissued and constantly reissued, always with remastering and demastering and unmastering and plus mastering. I mean, here is, I've been saving this, the big reveal. I mean, the super duper uber deluxe, every single take, everything that wound up on the cutting room floor version of the Goldberg variations. I mean, how to take something recorded in 1955 in mono that was issued on a budget CD at one point for like $5 and turn it into a $200 glamorous digital promotional item with a huge book. And I mean, it's insane, but it's legendary. It's its own myth, this performance. And so that's how things become reference recordings. You don't have to take it quite to that extreme. I must have 20 versions of this thing sitting around here in various places. And I was going to pull them all out and show them. I mean, it doesn't. You just take my word for it. Just look at the end result here. It's as though it's brand new. It never came out. It's being treated like the iconic release that it is. And if the label is willing to do that, and they can keep making money off of it, wow, baby, they've got a hot commodity. And that hot commodity boils down, when it's a wonderful performance, a stellar performance of its kind, you wind up with a reference recording. And since then, a couple of interesting things have happened. First of all, Gould remade the Goldberg variations, but he did it in a way, smart man, that was different enough that it's not directly comparable to his first version. That was brilliant, because he didn't eclipse the reference version of his first one. He only added a possible other reference to his first version. So the reference became Glenn Gould. Take your pick which Glenn Gould, but it's Glenn Gould is the reference. And that's a very interesting kind of fact. Very few artists manage to bring that off when you do two reference recordings of the same work with very, very different interpretations. So that's astonishing. But then, of course, the period instrument people got it, and harpsichord performances exploded. And as usual, because so many of them happened at the same time, so frequently, it's impossible to choose a reference recording. Even somebody like Gustav Leonhardt, who you might say was the reference for harpsichord, Bach, did the Goldberg variations a bunch of times, all on a harpsichord, sometimes with repeats, sometimes out. But it was Leonhardt, and he didn't have that kind of personality that Glenn Gould had, because quite frankly, the harpsichord doesn't allow that kind of personality most of the time, unless you've got a very special instrument like Wanda Landowska had, number one. And number two, harpsichord is because of their training, their naturally didactic training in the art of harpsichord playing as Bach might have wanted it, etc., 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 ad nauseum, do not generally develop the kind of personal approach to the music that pianists did, romantic pianists did, as a matter of course, which was, of course, the school in which Glenn Gould was trained. He was trained to be a personality. Most of today's harpsichordists are not, however good they are, and they are marvelous. My own favorite harpsichord version is Trevor Pinnock's. I love that performance. I think it's just brilliant and fun, and I can listen to it constantly. And he chose a fabulous instrument, and it's marvelously recorded. Just a beautiful, beautiful performance on harpsichord. But I really would be hard-pressed to say that that was a reference, not just because I like it. It was actually one of the earlier ones to come out. In terms of like today, where there's like a bazillion of them. So what we were left with was Glenn Gould becoming even more of a reference in contradistinction to all of these harpsichord-y people who all kind of sound the same, doing their thing. Now, I know period instrument specialists and harpsichord fans are going to say, no, that's impossible. How could you say that? Every harpsichordist sounds different. I can tell a harpsichordist when I hear one. Knock yourself out. It could be I'm just not good enough a listener to identify the sound of a particular harpsichordist on any given day. There are artists that I admire just enormously who play the Goldberg variations besides Trevor Pinnock on the harpsichord. Leonhardt was one. Blandine Verlet, I think she's just phenomenal. Blondine, pardon me. I loved her stuff. I really did, especially her Couperin, which just blew my mind. There's wonderful music on the harpsichord played by wonderful artists, but there are different qualities that are called for by that music and called for by the aesthetics of the given day. And the idea that you were going to achieve a Glenn Gould-like personal degree of freedom and characterization on a harpsichord that everybody would notice and immediately acclaim. I'm not saying people couldn't do it. I'm saying it didn't matter as much in terms of the field, generally, what was out there. And so Glenn Gould's Goldberg variations remained the reference recording despite the period instrument movement and the loud howls of outrage that people were still listening to this music on the piano. It even enhanced its quality because it enhanced its distinctiveness. And that's the story. A wonderful story, a fascinating story. And sure, it is the reference. And whether you like Bach on the piano or not, you don't know the Goldberg variations unless you've got Glenn Gould 1955. That's just a fact. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks for joining me, and take care.